comes up, I'll start talking.
That's great.
Apparently, I have the slowest computer in the world. Hang in there with me, folks.
And Laura, if that doesn't pull up from the email, I can go ahead and read the beginning introductory part and just do the roll, if that would be helpful.
Would you please do that? Because my computer's frozen. I'm not sure why. I don't want to waste time.
No, that's perfectly fine.
Thank you.
Sure. Well, we'll go ahead and begin the meeting today of the Professional Counseling Advisory Committee for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. My name is David Fye. I'm the Executive Director for the board. And we'll go ahead and begin this meeting that is being held remotely by conference call and by other electronic mediums. So I'll go ahead and read off roll. And when I read your name, just indicate that you are present. Jim Kilmartin, I believe, is absent today. Harriet Bachner.
I'm here.
Thank you. Melissa Briggs. I don't see her on the call yet. Michael Countryman.
Here.
Samantha Holloway.
Here.
Bob Kircher.
Here.
Masa Magsaudi, I believe, is absent today. Vanessa Perez.
Here. Good morning.
Good morning. Andrew Secor, I believe he said he may not be able to attend, so I'll let you know if I see him log in a little bit later. Adil Torres Rivera.
Here.
And Amanda Wade.
Here.
And then BSRB staff members that are present today include myself, David Fye, Executive Director for the BSRB, and also Leslie Allen, the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager for the BSRB. Next, I'll read a short message about this meeting being held remotely. This is a meeting of the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board's Advisory Committee for Professional Counseling. We do allow public comment to address the advisory committee about individuals' concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or COMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting as no individuals requested to provide public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is conducted by medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of COMA are not suspended, so we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the COMA. On June 28, 2024, we sent notice to the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of such meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice on the website. An agenda and other meeting material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of this meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And Laura, I did check the conference call before we got started. No one was currently on the call, but I'll let you know if someone beeps over. And while we were going through the introductory material, I believe I saw Melissa Briggs start to enter through the waiting room.
Great.
I don't see her yet in the room, but if she comes back, I will let you know that she's in attendance.
Terrific. Thank you. Okay. So let's see. Agenda approval is the first it's the second item on our agenda. So we need to go ahead and look at this agenda. And if anybody has any questions, let us know. And if not, I need a motion to approve the agenda.
And Laura, I just want to let you know, Melissa Briggs is in attendance now. She's entered the waiting room, so she is present as well.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, Melissa. So we're looking for an agenda approval motion.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Need a second?
I second it.
Terrific. All opposed, no, wait a minute. All in favor, say aye.
I,
Any opposed, same sign. Okay, the agenda is approved. Well, this is a really exciting day because we get to welcome some new advisory committee members. One of them is not here, so we'll get to them next time. But we would like to welcome Amanda Wade and Samantha Holloway. And we would like to ask if you would just say a little bit about yourself so we can get to know you a little bit better. And then the rest of the people on the Zoom call are going to do the same thing, so you know who you're working with. So Samantha and Amanda, please introduce yourselves and say a little bit about yourselves.
Hi, I'm Samantha Holloway. I'm a teaching assistant professor at K-State in their school counseling program, and I'm excited to be on your board.
Perfect. Welcome. We would have no idea where you teach by that lovely backdrop that you have, right? Or where you counsel, rather. Sorry. Well, welcome. Yeah, you will find this to be a great committee, and your input will be really valuable. So speak up and ask questions and give ideas, and we're glad you're here. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Amanda Wade. I'm a licensed professional counselor who works at Pratt Regional Medical Center in the internal medicine offsite clinic for outpatient services. And I am also an adjunct instructor for Pratt Community College in psychology.
Terrific. Well, welcome. And same to you. Welcome. And please dive in and ask questions and give your feedback. And I get really excited when we get new people because it's just new energy and new perspectives. And so we're glad you're here. We will hear from Masha Mashkudi next time. I assume she'll be here next time. Let's go around the Zoom instead of the room, and just have everybody introduce yourselves so that Amanda and Samantha know a little more about you. Doesn't matter who goes first.
I'll go first. My name is Vanessa Perez. I'm a licensed professional counselor as well, and working in Mental Health Association of South Central Kansas, actually Mental Health America of South Central Kansas. Sorry, we just changed our name and I never remember. I currently work in the residential programs, been here for about 5 years, getting ready to transition over to a different department, but still same agency. I'm glad you guys are here. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Vanessa.
I'll go. I'm Harriet Bachner. I live in Pittsburgh, Kansas. I am a retired emeritus professor of psychology and counseling at Pitt State. And prior to that, I had a private practice for 20 years in Dallas, Texas.
Terrific. Thank you, Harriet.
I can go next. Bob Kircher. I'm the associate professor of psychology and counseling at the University of St. Mary, and I'm an LCPC. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Bob.
Can go next. I'm Edwin Torres Rivera, and I'm professor at Wichita State. And I don't know what name we have now. We changed our name at the department 3 times, so I'm confused about where I'm a cancer educator. So that's kind of basically it.
Thank you, Adil.
I can go. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. I'm Melissa Briggs. I am an LCPC. I work in private practice, and I also work as a chief administrative officer for TFI Family Services, and I teach at K-State as an assistant professor in the drama therapy department.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you.
And good morning, I'm Michael Countryman. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for South Central Mental Health Counseling Center, and I'm an LCPC or LCAC and LCPC.
Terrific. Thank you, Michael.
Sure.
Who else is on here? Oh, Leslie. Leslie.
Good morning. I am Leslie Allen. I'm the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager for the BSRB, and I have been working for the board since 1999. Nice to meet you both.
I'll just
Thank
go ahead
you,
and say a
Leslie.
couple words. Thank you, Laura. I've introduced myself at the beginning of the meeting, David Fye, Executive Director for the BSRB, and I have talked to both Samantha and Amanda by email when they expressed interest in being recommended to join the advisory committee. So nice to meet you both in person by screen over Zoom, and appreciate you both volunteering your time to serve on this committee. I agree with Laura, what she said. It's a really important committee. The work of this committee is really valuable to assist the work of the board. So thank you both for serving, and look forward to working with you both. In my capacity, if you have questions about your role as an advisory committee member, don't hesitate to send me an email, or feel free to let me know and I can give you a phone call. We will have an official training where we go through a lot of information about responsibilities at the next advisory committee meeting. That will be in October. And so we'll talk about things like the Kansas Open Meeting Act and the Kansas Open Records Act and different things like that. But before we go into that full training, just a kind of a heads up, like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. One thing that can kind of be a little bit different for some people who haven't been on a committee like this, you just need to avoid any kind of communication outside of a public meeting that would involve a majority of members of the committee when talking about items related to the work of the committee. So that includes things like a phone call or an in-person type gathering, but it can also include email messages that people send back and forth. And I know in some groups, people are used to working with each other, but in this context, that type of communication has to be done in a public meeting. And so just want to make you aware of that so we don't run into any issues accidentally with that. But like I said before, really excited to meet you both and look forward to working with you more on the committee.
Thank you, David. So I'm Laura Shaughnessy, and before I talk a little bit about myself, I want to say that David and Leslie are outstanding staff folks. I have never called Leslie institutional knowledge as a nickname to her face, but I should. Her knowledge and breadth and depth of what has happened at the BSRB is outstanding, and she is, well, amazing. So I could go on. And the same thing about David Fye. When he became our executive director and I realized who we had hired, I remember being so thrilled and thinking, oh my gosh, we made the right choice. Your knowledge, compassion, empathy, and legal background. I mean, it's just, we're in good hands. So I always say that my role is to lead and follow at the same time. I honestly feel like I do more following because there's so much to learn and do, but because of David Fye, I look like a good leader. So I just want to say thank you out loud that you provide so much form and structure to the good work that needs to happen here.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate the kind words.
Thank you. So I'm Laura Shaughnessy. I am the chair of the advisory committee. I'm also the board member, the counseling board member for the BSRB. I am an LCPC. I've been in practice for 25 years. I love what I do, and it's really humbling to be on a Zoom meeting with counseling educators, folks who are out in the field. It has opened my eyes to so many important things over the last 4 years. I'm now entering my 5th year. I'm also the Compact Commissioner for the state of Kansas, which has meant some things, but it's about to mean more things because the counseling compact is finally going to happen, and we're so excited about that. I think that's all I'd say. I live in Roland Park. I live really close to the state line, and I love Kansas, and it is really an honor to serve Kansas in this important way. So again, welcome to our new folks, and reach out to me, to David, to anybody else if you have questions or need anything. Okay, let's go ahead with the review of the minutes. So everybody received the minutes. David Fye sent out a packet last week. Does anybody have any questions or changes to the minutes? And if not, we need a motion to adopt the minutes from the last meeting.
I would move that we accept the minutes from the last meeting.
Thank you, Bob. I need a second.
I'll second.
Oh, thank you, Vanessa. Okay, we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Okay, we will adopt those minutes. Our next item is the discussion of the regulatory summit that happened in Puerto Rico, of all places. I did not get to go. David Fye was there. So David, do you want to share anything from that summit?
Sure. Yes, I was able to attend that summit. It is hosted by National Board for Certified Counselors, and also another entity called CCE, which provides some services to state counseling boards. The ACA was also in attendance as well. So it was attended by a lot of different contacts from state regulatory boards, or provinces, or not provinces, territories. There were a few that I met from different locations and the conference itself was held in Puerto Rico. And so it's kind of interesting to think a little bit differently in terms of some of the dynamics of different groups and where people live. But we had a really good conference. They focused on some different topics that are very relevant to our current work as an advisory committee. One of the main focuses for the conference was on technology and also looking at things like artificial intelligence. I know we've started that conversation as an advisory committee in terms of what is the role of regulating the use of artificial intelligence for practitioners. And so that conference, it really talked about encouraging states to somewhat embrace technology in terms of moving away from paper applications and trying to have more of an electronic process for the licensing components, but also making sure that you're having good reports and being able to analyze your data, and being able to learn from what you're doing and become more efficient and have things more effective. While at the same time, one of the issues with artificial intelligence is safeguarding confidential information, and how can that be done in a good, helpful way. And so there was a lot of good viewpoints that were expressed, and some of the licensing boards started to share if they used artificial intelligence for some of their processes, and a couple of them are using it for minute-taking purposes. And for some, it creates more of like a transcript, but for others, it summarizes information in a helpful way. And when you have an open meeting, you really don't have the same issues regarding things like confidentiality. So that's something that would be helpful, I think, for us to start to explore behind the scenes at the BSRB office to see if we can incorporate some of those tools. I know the state has a policy in terms of what you can use and what you can't when it comes to artificial intelligence. But as we are trying to educate ourselves in that area, it was a good discussion to kind of learn who's doing what in different states, and do they have policies, or have they started to have a conversation? And I think in general, when you look at the different contacts in different states, I feel like a lot of people are feeling like we need to catch up on this topic, that it's been out there for a little bit, and we may not even think about the same thing when we talk about artificial intelligence, but people are using it. And so we need to educate ourselves about what artificial intelligence really is and what it does. And then also understand maybe what our role is or what it could be to help make sure that licensed practitioners are protecting the public and using it in an effective way. So really good topics. Like I said, really enjoyed the conference, and continue to develop a network of different contacts in different states so that I can reach out to them with questions and they feel comfortable doing the same with me. So really benefited from it. And Laura, I know you were not able to attend in person. You were able to observe the content and kind of attend remotely for some of the sessions. And so I'm curious if you had any takeaways or thoughts you wanted to share with the advisory committee as well.
Well, I certainly love the emphasis on technology because, we're chasing it. And so the Zooms that I attended were all based on technology, and it was the same thing. One thing that I really appreciate is how collaborative everybody is. How do you do it in your state? Here's how we do it. Here's an idea. I am so grateful for the collaboration, even though, the boards of all the states are set up so differently. I mean, we are unique in our structure, but we still, when it drills down to how are we going to serve the public and protect the public, there are many, many good ideas that we share and benefit from every time we go to one of those conferences. And they're twice a year. There's usually one in the winter and one in the summer or ish. And it seems like every time we go, they are right out in front of what the main topics that we need to be facing are. So I'm really grateful to always go and to participate.
And for some of you who are new to the advisory committee, I think sometimes it can be helpful when we talk about the different groups to kind of put that in context. And so the National Board for Certified Counselors, that is the group that oversees the licensing examination as well. and they provide services to different state regulatory boards that regulate professional counseling. They share information. They provide us with opportunities to listen to different speakers. And I think one of the benefits from working with them is kind of building that network and learning what other states are doing or getting proactive in terms of the different topics. And when we have those conferences, generally I attend as a representative from the BSRB, and then the professional counseling board member attends those meetings as well, or can attend those meetings if they're able to do so. And then we try to bring that information back to you to kind of share that what we have learned and what we can use to benefit the work of the advisory committee and ultimately the work of the board. And so we have usually a meeting in around this time period for the National Board for Certified Counselors. And then there's another entity that's the American Association of State Counseling Boards, AASCB. And AASCB has an annual meeting usually at the beginning of January or the beginning of February. And similarly, they introduce speakers with professional counseling topics. They hold a conference, and they provide an opportunity for state regulatory boards to work together to learn from each other. And just kind of in a bigger picture, since some of you are kind of new to the work of this committee, you are familiar with your profession and the work of the BSRB as a composite board that oversees 7 different licensed professions. But every state has a certain amount of sovereignty to determine license requirements for each of those professions. And so a lot of the states have tried to find some similarities in terms of the testing requirements and things like that, but every state has some quirks and some differences. And so things like the multi-state compact have been an effort by a lot of states to kind of come together on some unified terms. But that is one of the interesting things. Frequently, this advisory committee will look at recommendations to be able to provide back to the board because of some of the differences between this way that states license professional counseling. And so we're always kind of looking to see how do our requirements compare to other states, and are things that other states, are they doing things that perhaps we could learn from and make a recommendation to the board in terms of some other future recommended changes. So just kind of wanted to frame that. And if you ever do hear us reference a group by the acronym that you're not familiar with, please let us know, because we do get pretty deep into the acronyms when we talk about levels of licensing and different entities. So hopefully that's helpful information. But yeah, if you ever have questions about that, feel free to let us know.
Thank you, David. So do you want to jump into the executive director's report?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. So every meeting, as the executive director for the board, I attend each of the advisory committees, and I work with the chair of the advisory committees to help facilitate the work of the advisory committees, and then the recommendations they make go back to the board. And so at these meetings for the advisory committee, I provide a report, and I generally try to provide some operating updates concerning the work of the BSRB as a state agency, and then some updates from recent board meetings to keep you informed of the work of the board. And then if there's any other items that I think would be relevant, I try to make you aware of those items too. Sometimes there's legislative committees meeting, sometimes other items. So we'll kind of start with some BSRB operations updates. Just to let you know, behind the scenes, we did start something about 3 years ago. I came on board as the executive director for the BSRB back in November of 2020. And at that time, we started a process of moving towards new technology. So we did start a cycle of changing some of our desktop computers to laptops and going on a rotating basis under the state system. So we have some of those laptops that are coming up at the end of their leases. And so we're going to be transitioning more of those over to new lease agreements. And so we're also enhancing our security features. If you attend any meetings here physically at the BSRB office, there have been a number of changes to state buildings over the last couple of years. So we've developed a couple of different items here. We now have a key card reader at our front door versus a traditional lock. We're also going to have a monitor that'll be installed here in the next probably few months. And if you look at other state buildings, you'll see some of the other similar security features. So there are some changes going on in that area. And then also just want to let you know, every state agency has to submit a proposed budget by September 15th of every year. So within the next month, I'll probably be trying to put that together at least in a rough draft form, and then I'll be submitting that by September 15th. And so that also includes some priorities for the agency and some estimated expenditures. But as a state agency that does not receive any money directly from the state, we operate based on the license revenue that we receive from the individuals that we license. Sometimes we're called a fee-funded agency, and so we charge those license fees, and then we operate based on what we have in our fee fund balance. And so every year the legislature will set a certain limit on how much we can spend in any given year. But if we don't spend it, it just stays in that fund. And as long as we have a good enough amount in the fund, we don't have to consider things like any kind of fee increases. We just go ahead and put our priorities in place, submit the budget by September 15th. The Division of Budget in the governor's office reviews that. The governor makes a recommendation the first week in January, and then in the spring legislative session meets, and they make further adjustments. So we are starting basically the first part of that process. And so in the next month, I'll be submitting the agency's revised budget estimate. And then that'll be for this current fiscal year, and then also new budget estimates for the next 2 years. Another note about operations, we are getting very close to going live with CE Broker. So just to kind of frame this for some of the new people, CE Broker is a company that works with state licensing boards in other states. And they just started working with some of the state licensing boards here in Kansas. They have an active agreement with the Board of Healing Arts and also the Board of Nursing. And what CE Broker does is they will offer a free account to licensees to be able to upload your documentation of continuing education hours. So when you have satisfied those requirements and you get your certificate or other documentation, you can upload this into the CE Broker portal and then assign it that these are the hours that I have for ethics, or if you're able to diagnose and treat, you can say these are the hours that I have in that category, or if they're just general hours, you can assign them that way too. And then one of the benefits is that when you renew your license, 10% of all licensees are selected randomly for audit by the BSRB. And if you would be selected for audit and you have used CE Broker, we can go ahead and log into that portal, verify that you completed your hours, and then if there's no issues, we can approve that audit and then you're done, which is much quicker than the current process, which involves people sending materials back and forth to the BSRB and us going through that process. So this is a free service to the state licensing boards. It's a free account for licensees if they choose to sign up for it. It is voluntary. The way that company does make money is they have some higher level tier membership things that people can sign up for if they want to do that, but they're not required to. And so they have enough people that voluntarily choose the additional services that it makes financial sense for them, but it is a nice benefit to our licensees. And it's also a nice benefit you don't have to hold on to those records separately and risk losing them or keeping them in an email, from an employer perhaps that you may change jobs and then not have access to that email any longer, which we've seen a couple times. And so it's a nice service. We have been working with them for several months to get that all up and running. We are almost to the point where we're going to be sending out a notice to licensees to kind of explain what the process is and how they can go about starting that if they would like to. The first profession they're going to be launching will be professional counseling. And then after that, it'll be social work. And then they're going to be kind of rolling out the other professions one after another. So keep an eye out for that. We will probably send an email out or other notice and then have some information posted on our website so you can learn more about CE Broker and see if it's something that would be beneficial. But we will be encouraging our licensees to do it. But again, like I said, it's an optional service. Moving on to some items from the last board meeting. The board did meet on Monday, July 8th. And I'll just highlight a few items the board discussed and took action on at that meeting. There is a new public member of the board, and that is Denise Seisman. Jackie Lightcap is a board public member who decided not to seek reappointment for a second term. So Jackie Lightcap is now off the board, and Denise Seisman has her position, or the position previously held by Jackie. And Denise is going to be the public member for two of the advisory committees. That is the Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee and also the Behavior Analyst Advisory Committee. I had spoken to this advisory committee a few meetings back about a proposal to approach the topic of jurisprudence exam in a alternative fashion to make that process optional, but make it live and offer continuing education credit for anyone who wanted to do the jurisprudence. type exam live. And so there were a couple other advisory committees that I talked to in between the last board meeting, and they were in favor of this approach as opposed to having a requirement and a fee for people to take more of a traditional test. And so all the advisory committees have expressed support for this new jurisprudence style approach. And as long as we can get everything lined up, we hope to launch this sometime this fall. So I will let you know when we get closer to that. In terms of some other items, in terms of business from the board meeting, the board did elect a new chair. Mary Jones has served 2 years as board chair and had done a wonderful job as chair. She decided to not seek re-election to her chair position. And so Dave Anderson was able to run, and he is the new board chair. So congratulations to Dave Anderson. And Laura Shaughnessy is the new vice chair. So congratulations to Laura. And I look forward to working with Dave and Laura more over the next year. Also at the board meeting, the board appointed several new advisory committee members, including the 3 individuals appointed to this committee, as well as 2 individuals for marriage and family therapy, 2 for master's level psychology, and 3 for social work. And the other 3 advisory committees are going to be considering recommendations on new members during this month's meeting and looking to have individuals appointed at the September board meeting. Some other items that were discussed, Kansas recently passed legislation to join a social work multi-state compact. And now that we have had enough states pass that model legislation, we can move to the next phase to implement that compact, which will include states naming a compact commissioner for their state to attend meetings of the rules committee and work out some of the logistics before the compact can go live. So the board did appoint me as the compact commissioner for the social work multi-state compact to make sure that I'm not wearing too many hats and able to do the work that I'm helping the board with, and also some of the other tasks for the association. I will be transitioning out of my current role as commissioner for the SIPAC compact. That is the compact for psychologists. I had held that position for the last couple of years as we got into the SIPAC compact, but I've been talking with the 2 licensed psychologists on the board, and I believe one of them will be interested in taking on that role. And also thanks to Laura for being such a great compact commissioner for the professional counseling compact. That has been a help for us as well. So
Thank you.
I will initially be taking on the role of the social work commissioner for Kansas for the multi-state compact. And then once it's up and running, we can determine if I should stay in that role or if that can move to another social work board member. So, and then a couple other items that the board worked on at the last board meeting. The board discussed a topic briefly, or started to discuss a topic that has to do with alias information for board licensees. So the board is charged to oversee the regulation of licensing, and that is a big task that we do here at the office. But we also investigate complaints against practitioners as well. And one of the ways that we can verify the public is able to recognize their licensed professional counselor, for example, in our system, is that if individuals change their name, we list their alias information or previous names in our verification portal so that they can know which individual they may wish to file a complaint against or verify that someone is licensed. However, we have had individuals that have requested the ability for that information not to be displayed if it was a name that was never used while they were practicing. And so this is a new topic for the board. And so the board started a discussion about that. They asked legal counsel to look to see if there were any issues with the board having a policy concerning other names not used when practicing. And the board will continue that conversation at a future meeting. They asked me to reach out to other contacts with state agencies around the state and in other states to see if they have similar policies on that. And most honestly do not. From my initial conversations with them, they were very curious to hear kind of how this conversation evolves. And they thought it would be good for a lot of licensing agencies to have some consistency in this area. But they said that that was not a topic that they had focused on yet. So we'll kind of wait and see what legal counsel brings back to the board and continue that conversation. The board also started a conversation about advisory committee expectations. We do have an advisory committee policy that is a fairly short document, just a little over a page, And it does outline the responsibilities for the advisory committee members and the real work of the advisory committee to assist the board in discussing these topics and making recommendations back to the board, or to consider items the board has referred to the advisory committees to discuss. But there is a language in the policy that says any of the policies and practices that relate to the board members should also relate to the advisory committee members. And that language has never really been fully fleshed out or defined. And so there is a lack of clarity exactly what it means. For example, because of the statutory language, board members are compensated a small amount for attending official meetings of the board or advisory committees. However, advisory committee members are not. There's not authorization for us to do that. So we know it's not one-to-one where everything applies, but there have been questions about, perhaps there should be language about how many absences advisory committee members can have, or should there be language that all the advisory committee members need to be licensees? That currently does not appear in the advisory committee policy, or things along those lines, just kind of setting expectations for the advisory committee members in more specific language. And so the board started a discussion on that, did not have any specific recommendations at that meeting, but if they return to that topic and they do outline some changes, I'll communicate those back to you as advisory committee members. And I guess the last item that I'll touch upon from that board meeting, we did have the board start to talk about the regulations for continuing education and also documentation for continuing education. And most of the advisory committees have made recommendations on changes to those regulations. And we started to have a conversation. Ultimately, for those to move forward as recommended changes, the board will need to take a vote to approve those to be sent through the process and reviewed by the Department of Administration and also the Attorney General's office. But Leslie Allen, the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager, she noted to the board that there are some differences concerning what qualifies for continuing education between the professions and some of the language as well. And she asked the board if they wanted any kind of comparison regarding some of the major areas of difference that perhaps could be resolved if the board wants to go in that direction. So the board did ask for some more information so they could see the differences and at least be able to review those to see if there should be some changes for consistency before they put forward the other recommendations regarding mostly language. So that'll be something coming up. And then just a note about future meetings of the board. Usually the board meets the second Monday every other month. So they would meet in January and then in March and then in May and then in July. Well, in September, the board tries to hold an all-day planning meeting, and they usually try to hold that in person off-site. So not here at the office, but somewhere in the state of Kansas. And that meeting does move around pretty much every year. And so the board is going to be holding that meeting in Lawrence this year. And that will be on Monday, September 30th. And tentatively, we were going to have a regular board meeting on the second Monday of the month for September, but that was going to be a conflict with another meeting that I had scheduled that I needed to attend. And the board decided, instead of holding that first regular board meeting followed by the annual all-day meeting, the board would like to go ahead and just move to hold, essentially the all-day planning meeting will now be a day and a half. So it'll start on the evening of Sunday, September 29th, and the board will meet for business items from about 5:30 to 7:30. And then the next day, the board will hold its all-day planning meeting from about 9 to 3:30. So there will not be a regular September board meeting. They'll just take care of that all at the end of September. And then in November, like I said, we would normally have the second Monday of the month as the board meeting, but that would fall on Veterans Day. And to allow individuals the flexibility to attend ceremonies that day, or if their office is going to be closed that day, we wanted to go ahead and move that meeting. So I polled board members, and that meeting is going to take place now, the first Monday of that month. So it'll be on September 4th instead of, or November 4th instead of November 11th. So, and then just one other item in terms of upcoming meetings that I wanted to share with both of you, or all of you. Last year, on behalf of the BSRB staff, we held a couple of new types of meetings. that the agency had never held before, at least in this way. And it was an informational forum for educators. And so in the past, the BSRB had held roundtable discussions at times with representatives from different schools and colleges, but it was a physical in-person meeting with a handful of people around an actual table. Given the prevalence of programs and the people that might have interest in this around the state, last year we opened this up and tried to reach out to a lot of different programs and provided an opportunity to provide information on statutory changes that the BSRB had put forward or were connected to the BSRB over the last few years. And so I put together an informational forum for educators and then invited a number of individuals to attend. This year, we want to do something similar, but focused on some of the recent regulatory changes that might affect some of the requirements for licensure. And this would be open to individuals at any of the educational institutions for any of the professions that we regulate. It is going to be held on Thursday, September 19th at 1 o'clock. We're tentatively going to be scheduling that for about an hour. We don't plan to go the whole time. We want to leave some time for question and answer at the end, and then also some time for any of the educators to submit any comments that they would like to have us bring back to the board. Later on in that month of September, the board will have its all-day planning meeting. So perhaps there could be some comments or questions that could be helpful when the board talked about its legislative agenda. So the meeting for educators, we're going to be holding that on Thursday, September 19th from about 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock over Zoom. And then last year we held a similar meeting, but that was for employers, a lot of mental health agency or entity type employers. We held a very similar meeting, but focused on the employment side. And that we are going to do again this year. And that will be the following day on Friday, September 20th at 1 o'clock. So these are not official meetings of the board. We basically usually it's optional for board members to attend, but last year we had a few attend those types of meetings. But it is a nice way for us to kind of have some feedback and continue to build relationships with individuals from those schools and also from the employers in the state. So that's the plan right now, is to hold those both in September and then collect any kind of feedback from educators and employers and then share that with the board at the board's all-day planning meeting at the end of September. So with that, I'll go ahead and end my report and see if there's any questions over operations or items from the board meeting or any of those additional meetings that I discussed.
Any questions for David? So I just want to point out that everything he named is times 7. We have 7 disciplines on our board. So that's everything he does times 7. So I just again want to say thank you, David, for all the work that you do. You work so hard. Yeah. How many people attended those meetings, those Zoom calls last year?
That's a great question. I should have mentioned that. Yeah, I mentioned in the past we held those around a physical table, but we wanted to reach more people. I believe each one of those was close to around 40 people, somewhere between 35 and 40 that we were
Did
able
you have Zoom feeds also?
we were doing them on Zoom. We did not broadcast those live.
Okay.
There were some individuals afterwards that said they weren't able to attend, but they would have loved to see those. So I think what we're going to do this year is we're going to record them. And as long as there's no issues, we'll go ahead and just upload them to the BSRB YouTube channel afterwards. When we have meetings of the board or meetings of the advisory committee, they're more secure because we know who's logging on and who's going to be present. When we start opening those up to a lot of individuals that we may not know very well, there's always the risk that we could be Zoom bombed or things like that. So I always try to make sure that we have secure meetings. But like I said, as long as there's no issues, happy to upload that afterwards and share that information with anybody else afterwards.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how many people view them.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So any other questions for David Fye? Okay, David, thank you so much for your report. Thank you so much. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is talk about the Professional Counseling Multi-State Compact. I'll say a little bit and then I'll ask David to say something. From my perspective, there's not a lot to report in the sense that Greg Searles, the executive director for the multi-state compact, he sends updates about what is going on. We haven't, the next step, as far as I know, we have a meeting in October that's going to be for every member state, which I'm really excited about. David, do we have 36 states? Is that the number?
I think that sounds about right. Yeah.
I think that's about right. So we will all gather by Zoom in October, and I anticipate that at that meeting, Greg will be presenting the final rollout of dates, anticipatory changes that might happen last minute, but we're getting really close to a launch. Everyone keeps saying that, it'll probably be the first of the year, and that is closer than we think. So I hope to be able to report back at our December meeting with some really good news about that, maybe even October. I haven't looked at the timing, but as we know updates about a launch and about anything specific that will impact our state, we will certainly let you know. And David, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, just for those of you that aren't as familiar with the compact, there is a website for the Counseling Compact. It's counselingcompact.org. And one of the features on that website, they have an FAQ for counselors so they can learn a little bit more about the compact. There is a map that shows all of the different states where the legislation has been passed. And then there's a handful of other states that have a different color coding where the legislation has been introduced, but it has not passed. And that may be because it didn't pass this year, or it may be because their legislative session lasts the whole calendar year. So there's different things there. Also, I believe Texas, their legislature only meets every other year. So it is possible that things may not pass in a given year because of the timing. But it's hard to tell. They don't have a list right on that page of the website, but it does look like it's around 35 or 36 states. So the vast majority of that map is shaded in. And the compact right now, like Laura said, is getting closer to being launched. When the compact is live, what it will allow member states to do, as long as they are eligible for the compact, individuals who are at the clinical level will have the ability to request a privilege to practice in other compact member states. So it's sort of an alternative to licensure. Right now, the main way that people are able to practice in one state or another is to get licensed. And what has happened traditionally is you've had individuals who have had many different licenses if they travel and they want to practice physically in those states, or if they want to provide telehealth service into those states. And so one of the main reasons for these compacts has been to reduce the need for licensees to have 5 licenses, 10 licenses, 15 licenses, and not just the cost of that, but also meeting the continuing education requirements in all those different states. So with the compact, there will still be the option to continue to stay licensed in those states. That is still an option, but this will provide an alternative with a privilege. And the privilege is similar to a license, but it is not the same. One of the items that states are working out right now is how much to charge for the privilege to practice. A couple other items that are being resolved before states can go live. One is they will need to provide information to the compact as far as who is all eligible to practice. And one of the items that's included in the model legislation is individuals had to have a degree in counseling that had 60 hours. Some states previously had a requirement that was 48 hours, but the compact language establishes a 60-hour floor. And so they want a list from all the different states in terms of at the clinical level of licensure who all had a 60-hour degree versus a 48-hour degree. Now, going back and checking all those licenses and all that history, it was pretty daunting. So there is currently a rule that has been proposed for public comment that would basically say anyone who was licensed as of the date a state passed the compact would be deemed to be okay by that standard, which means for the BSRB, we passed the compact language last year, and the compact became effective July 1st of 2023. So anyone who held a clinical license prior to that date whether they had a 48-hour degree or 60-hour degree, they're fine. For anyone past that date, we'll need to provide information to them if they have the 60-hour degree or the 48-hour degree. So that's something that we will need to be working on to be able to share with them. Additionally, the compact does require that states require as a condition of licensure passing a background check. And Kansas currently does not require that for our licensees. So that is something that we will have to have in place prior to our individual licensees being eligible for the compact. But we did have some language already in statute to authorize that for any of our licensees. And then there was some additional cleanup language that was passed in the statute as far as protecting some of that information from open records requests and things like that, that passed this year. So we'll need to work with the Kansas Bureau of Investigation and try to make sure that's lined up so that, and also to get clarity if that has to apply to all the individuals with the clinical license or just the ones who are interested in getting a privilege. I think the way the compact would like things to be set up is they would like a list of everyone who is eligible meeting the criteria for the compact, which would include the 60 hours, it would include the background check. But for us to send that list, we would need to make sure we knew who all had met those requirements. So right now, before the compact can go live, they need to make sure that states are in alignment with all those things. However, they have said that as soon as 2 states are ready and the data system to keep track of who all has the privileges, as long as that is all set up, they will start with just a few and then more can join along that way. So we're trying to make sure we're doing what we need to do so that our licensees can take advantage of it as soon as it is active. Like Laura said, I think the goal or the plan is later this year. Hopefully that can be launched and then we'll put out information. We have some information already on our website, but we'll definitely provide updates once we have more development.
Yeah. Very exciting time. The open-ended question is, how will the compact impact our budget, our revenue, licensing revenue? And I don't know that any state can predict how that will be. David, are there conversations with EDs from other states about how they're trying to figure that out?
There are, and that goes into I described it as a privilege as an alternative to getting a license. And I think one of the things that states will need to determine is how much they want to charge for that privilege to practice. Some states have looked at their budget and they have said, we currently operate on a balance and our license costs this amount. If we lose our out-of-state licensees, that's really going to hurt us financially. So to make sure that we balance, we will need to charge the same amount for the privilege. We have not gone down that road yet. The Counseling Compact has started to have a discussion about, I think the professional or the physical therapist compact may be one that involves the privilege as well. One of the issues is the compacts are all set up somewhat differently. So not all of them use a model like a privilege, but that is something that we will need to have the board look into in terms of how much to set that privilege amount. I don't think there would be any reason that would need to be higher than a license. But it's kind of like with the other compacts, it's to the benefit of the licensee not to have so many licenses. But when you have state licensing boards that are operating based on a balance of we charge as much for fees because that's what we need to operate, if you now start losing a lot of the license revenue from people living outside of the state, you can't just absorb that loss of revenue without figuring out either to cut operational spending if you can, or figure out a way to adjust fees or something else. And so this privilege will be a way that you can help balance it. And if there are more people seeking privileges because they're lower than a license, that may be helpful. But right now, we just don't know how things are going to kind of sort out at the end of the day. It's a little different. We've talked a little bit about the social work compact. And with that one, it's set up differently. The social work compact, it allows states to issue a multi-state license. And so with the social work compact, you can get a multi-state license in your home state and then practice in all other states without paying any additional fees. And so that compact for sure lets state charge a multi-state license fee that is higher than the traditional license fee, knowing that they're going to lose out-of-state licenses and how can they make up that revenue. So probably in a few years, we will have a better understanding of how many licensees we will lose from out of state. But you know, it's a little different when you talk about the SIPAC compact for psychologists or the professional counseling that have alternatives to licensure versus the social work one, which is really going to replace traditional licensure with a single state versus a multi-state model. So don't want to get in the weeds too much, but it is really interesting if you start looking at all these compacts. But for the professional counseling one, we're going to be trying to get that up and running and then figuring out how many people decide to get the privilege instead of staying licensed in Kansas.
Right.
And just to clarify too, anybody who is wanting to practice under the compact will still need to have at least one license that is active in their home state. That's one of the requirements. You'll still need to have that home state license active, but instead of getting a license in the other states you want to practice that are part of the compact, you'll now have the option to get a privilege instead.
I know a lot of conversations are happening, you know, with people that I hear about, you know, being on the Missouri-Kansas border and which license to pick that they usually have. And I already know my answer. Yeah, it's coming. Okay, thank you for the framing, David. That's very important. And I know you're, you know, in one of your many roles, you're, you know, monitoring all this behind the scenes, and I'm doing that as well. It's a very exciting time.
It is.
Okay, let's move to some old business. We have 3 items of old business. The first one is 102-3-10A. David, do you want to frame that and we'll make some decisions if we need to?
Yes, and so Leslie might want to also jump in on part of this as well, but essentially I believe earlier this year, we had, so I guess we'll take a step back to kind of frame this too. We are a creature of statute when you talk about the BSRB as a state agency. So we exist because the Kansas legislature decided we needed to have a public protection agency to make sure that the public was protected by regulating licensed professionals in different areas. And for this agency, it's about regulating licensed professionals in the mental health profession. And so for professional counseling, we do that by making sure we follow standards in terms of licensure and then also investigating complaints against practitioners. And one of the requirements for licensure is that when individuals go to renew, they have to show completion of a certain number of continuing education hours. And so the statutes are the framework, and those are laws that are passed by the legislature. And within the statutory framework, states are allowed to put forward regulations that really flesh out the details under their statutory authority. If there's ever a conflict, the statutes prevail over the regulations, but the regulations really should be a natural extension of the statute. The one nice thing about the regulations is state agencies have a greater amount of flexibility in terms of changing these or updating these over time. And so over the last couple of years, we've been trying to bring regulations to the advisory committee for their profession to see if any of the language that has existed in these regulations over time is outdated, if it needs to be updated, if there's anything that's missing, or if there's anything that is ambiguous or needs to be clarified so people can have a better understanding of it. So we did bring these regulations to your committee earlier this year to review, and there was a little bit of a discussion, but in reviewing the minutes from some of those past meetings, we couldn't find documentation of official recommendations for changes. And so we do have some suggested changes for you, and we can kind of walk through those and then see if you have any other thoughts on changes. I can tell you just from the conversations Leslie and I have had with the other advisory committees, most of the changes are pretty consistent. And so I'll highlight those first. And then if you have any questions or if you have any other comments or other recommended changes, we can definitely consider that right now too. But looking at the first regulation, that's KAR 102-3-10A. And if you're curious about KAR, that's Kansas Administrative Regulations. So if you ever see KAR, that's just the regulation. But KAR 102-3-10A is the continuing education regulation for licensees for the professional counseling profession. And you have a copy of that in your materials for this meeting. It does talk about the number of hours of continuing education that are required. It talks about that it has to do with a 2-year license renewal period. And then as you go further down in the regulation, it lists different items that can be counted for continuing education, and then some that do not qualify. There is an item under number 7 that is called a self-directed learning project, pre-approved by the board. And that also says the maximum number of allowable continuing education hours shall be 10. In our discussions with the other advisory committees, and in what Leslie has seen here working with the licensing staff, no one really uses this self-directed learning project. And often what would possibly qualify under this category would also qualify under other categories. So we looked at this as an item that potentially could be removed from the regulation, because we don't think it'll be hurting or harming anyone, but it would allow us to reduce the size of the regulation by eliminating that item. So that is one of the recommended changes, is just to remove item number 7. And then additionally, if you look through the language of the regulations, and this is specifically in item 5, but it may be in other regulations too. Item 5 says, if a post-test is not provided, an activity consisting of completing a computerized interactive learning module, viewing a telecast or videotape, listening to an audio tape, or reading, the maximum number of allowable continuing education hours shall be 5. Basically, some of that language is a little bit outdated. I'm not saying people don't use videotapes or audio tapes currently. They may still be around and in use, but to update that with some modern changes, maybe changing that to video recording and audio recording would still continue to allow those, but would probably match what people are more frequently experiencing online or in other forums. So some updated language in terms of some of that technology would be helpful. Moving next to the KAR 102-3-11A, the documentation for continuing education. Similarly, I believe this regulation also references some of the outdated language. It also includes what would need to be provided for documentation for the self-directed learning project. So if you're removing that from the first regulation, it would make sense to remove the documentation for what would qualify for that item. Additionally, under 102-3-11A, documentation for continuing education, it says any of the following original signed forms of documentation shall be accepted as proof of completion of continuing education activity. We don't need the original signed form. Everything is traditionally scanned now to be provided. So I think if you look back at the date and some of these things were added, it's been several years since the last updated. I believe the last updating was in '97. So probably just removing the word original should satisfy that. And so that would be the recommended change. And Leslie, were there any other items that I didn't mention that you've seen kind of consistently that you think would be helpful to mention?
There's 2. So the first one in the continuing education regulation was, and I believe you guys discussed this, it was allowing people who are receiving supervision that is not in connection with a disciplinary action to receive a certain amount of continuing education. And the other is, I know some the other professions are adding in psychology, they specifically have participation in quality care, client or patient diagnosis, review conferences, treatment utilization reviews, peer reviews, case consultation with other licensees or other quality assurance committee or activity. And I wondered if the professional counselors would like to have that in theirs as well. Social work is adding that. I haven't talked to marriage and family therapy about it yet, but social work has added that to theirs.
And Leslie, the first item you mentioned, you said receiving, could you repeat that item?
Receiving supervision that is not part of a disciplinary action. So an LPC, or if an LCPC was doing a special training and getting supervision in that training for, you know, a new theory or treatment modality, they could get CEUs for that.
And you've seen that, we've seen that in the other professions, some of the other ones that listed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You recall kind of what hour amount might be relevant for that?
Well, the LPCs would be less because they have the lowest number of CEUs. So I don't know specifically, but it did kind of line up with providing supervision, so I think it would be around 7 for LPCs.
Well, and just for some of you that are new to the committee, so the board and the advisory committees, they don't formally adopt something like Robert's Rules of Order. So we're not held to strictly follow those types of things when it comes to recommendations of the advisory committee. So there can always be a formal vote where someone can make a motion and we would keep track of that in the minutes. Alternatively, we can reach recommendations by consensus. And so there can be discussion, and if there's no objection, what we would record in the minutes would be the advisory committee recommended this by consensus. And so just in case you were curious if any of these required a formal vote, they can, if you want to make a vote, but it doesn't have to be. If you have a discussion and there's no objections, or even if the majority supports it, that's okay too.
Certainly, let's start with consensus. Let's move toward that. If we have to take a vote, we can.
Okay, then let's go ahead. If you have any questions about any of the items that we discussed, we can go ahead and take them one at a time if that would be beneficial, or however you guys want to do it as a committee.
Anybody have any questions?
All of the items sound pretty good to me. The only one I'm kind of needing a little more information on would be, I would call it the practicing, but it sounds like it was attending treatment plans, consultation with a quality improvement team within an agency. Like, I'd probably want a little more depth on how that is, like how that would be captured to turn in for CEUs.
They have, so I know in psychology, they have kind of like rounds and they get signatures when they're doing these types of activities, but also some CEU providers there's one that they have an article on something, and then the CEU group gets together and they discuss and do like consultation about the case, and then they get like a sign-in sheet or a CEU certificate.
Well, I'm just thinking these types of meetings should be happening. They happen all the time within a case. So I'm just trying to figure out if it's a one-time thing, or like they do it specifically for learning, or if it's like this is a part of their job and they're counting this as a learning experience.
In the cases that I have seen, it has been part of a learning experience, not the job.
Okay.
Hold on, let me see if I can find.
Even if theirs is like that, I suppose we could add that phrase in there as a learning experience.
I'm just trying to figure out how you word it. Maybe we just need to see their word around how somebody would know that attending a treatment plan doesn't sound like that, because you always attend treatment plans and participate. So that wouldn't count, but this would, like, because the way you described it at first, I took it as attending treatment plans, consultation, review of case, deep dive case, review, which usually happens on maybe higher needs cases, or sometimes insurances require those, like, but it wouldn't be that. It would be something like set up specifically for learning for this specific licensee.
Yes. Let me see if I can find.
And Leslie, while you're looking, maybe we can go through some of the smaller ones and kind of get recommendations on those, and then we'll dig into that one a little bit more.
Okay.
So maybe I'll just see, is there any opposition to the proposed recommendation to update the language concerning audio tapes, videotapes into audio recording and video recording? Looks like there is consensus there to go ahead and make those changes. So we will go ahead and put that forward as a recommendation for both 102-3-10A and 102-3-11A. Any comments or any opposition to the proposed recommendation to remove the self-directed learning project and also the section of the continuing education documentation regulation for that item? Looks like there's consensus to go ahead and do that recommendation as well. So we'll go ahead and put that down as another recommendation from the advisory committee. And then I guess third, any opposition or comments in terms of removing the language that says there has to be an original signed form, just to remove the word original so that you have the documentation, but it doesn't have to be the actual specific paper copy that would be received. Any opposition or questions about that? Looks like there's consensus on that item too, so we'll just go ahead and include those all in the minute. And then we can go back to the two items that Leslie mentioned. And Leslie, did you find what you were looking for on that one?
I was looking at the documentation regulation for psychology because we just wrote it. And I'm trying to receiving supervision. So we kind of did it in order with the regulation. And the documentation required for that is a signed statement of attendance from the provider of the institute, symposium, workshop, or seminar and a bill of services. But it doesn't say specifically work or not work. It just, the type of documentation shows that it's a training, but it doesn't specifically say it's for that. It's just in that order. So, so if you wanted to add qualifying language, it would probably need to be in the CEU regulation.
Would that not be covered under number 3?
What? Three of what? I'm sorry.
The number 3 of our continuing education requirements? A seminar institute.
Yes, and psychology has that. But it's so they listed that from in an earlier. So their first item is a signed statement from a seminar, institute, conference, or workshop. And then they listed it again as what could be used for the quality case reviews and stuff. So they listed it twice. So it could be. They added and a bill of services, which I don't really know what that. I'd have to go back and listen to the meeting. I'm sorry. But yes, it would be a similar certificate.
I was just wondering if there was some way in the original 10A continuing education, if we could add an additional word or phrase in number 3, if that would cover it. Don't know. Just a thought.
Good idea. Any ideas on that language?
I mean, if it's meant to be like quality case reviews, I would think if you're paying someone to do it, it would be like, the only other word I could think of would be consultation. But I would think maybe our best route is to add consultation and supervision. If we're going to go with the recommendation of adding supervision to count for CEUs, we just put those together. Because this one allows for 30 hours to be that way, and I don't think we want all 30 hours to be supervision.
Right.
Receiving supervision?
Right.
Right,
But-
no, it wouldn't be like for years you are allowed to count 10 hours if you provide supervision. And so receiving supervision would also be limited to 10 or less. MFTs only allow 8. So it just really depends on what you feel is appropriate.
Right. I was thinking that the quality case reviews were similar, or especially if you're paying someone, which I think is that probably that pay or that bill that they indicated that as evidence, I paid you for this, would be consultation. And I would think maybe we would put the receiving supervision and receiving consultation in the same lump and limit them with the same number of hours that can be used that way.
Leslie, do you have any thoughts on that?
No?
I'm having a hard time with because consultation and supervision are two different things. So I'm having a hard time with that piece. I understand what Melissa said, some clarification. But a consultant is a peer-to-peer relationship. And a supervision is a senior versus a junior. And I think that's a part that I'm having a little hard time trying to digest.
Oh, I would not call them the same for sure. Maybe quality. I would think if you're getting a quality case review, it is likely coming from somebody with more experience than you. I mean, so. I wouldn't say that they were the same. I was just thinking we would list them the same, much like a seminar, institute, workshop, course, or mini course are all different things, just all in the same category for.
I got it. Yeah, I got it. That's a little bit easier for me to understand. I just immediately the two, one trigger one thing and another. So I just went two different directions in my head. So
Totally got it. Totally get it. But I guess maybe we should decide if we think it's a good idea to count supervision for CEUs before we say, let's add that into receiving supervision for CEUs.
yeah, and I think that in that sense, Melissa, also the whole idea also a peer-to-peer kind of consultation that we do when we go to conferences, and there's not necessarily more experience. It's just you probably know something more about child counseling versus maybe know a little bit more about elderly counseling, and we
Right.
kind of bring something together. So
Well, I guess this is sort of a bigger question concerning, do you want to add an item to allow hours for receiving supervision? So I'm curious if the rest of the advisory committee has any thoughts on that, if that's something that should be added or not. We have items that are included already, and this is another one that we could include or we could not. But I'm curious if other members of the committee have thoughts.
Anyone?
I like it. It's an added value.
Say more about that.
Well, I mean, I think that if you add in incentive to receive more supervision in terms of CEUs, why not? Okay, we all know that we need supervision as much as we can, regardless how many years we've been around. Okay, I mean, this is we're working with human beings, so that giving incentive, you give it that incentive, then promote supervision, and in that sense, also promote quality care. Just me.
I'm going to agree with that because I've noticed those that aren't working towards their LCPC, sometimes I find people who are struggling to understand they still have to have supervision. So I think this might promote that same idea. Like, if just because you don't have a plan in place for your LCPC doesn't mean you shouldn't be still receiving supervision as needed. So, and I think people are more eager to do things when they get credit some other way for it.
Because you said that, so an LPC who is not working on their clinical training plan, in the regulations, it's called, they have to be under direction. So maybe
Right.
it should be direction should be in there as well to allow for that to mesh.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And we do, just so you know, we send out a real bright colored paper with their license that says you have to be under direction if you're practicing. Because they do. And then they finish their hours and they think they're done too, and they don't continue until they get their LCPC or LSCSW or whatever profession.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's important.
Okay. Well, it sounds like there may be some support for adding receiving supervision or direction. And as
I
far
don't hear anything, I don't hear any adverse reaction to it.
in terms of the number of hours, just that as a max per license period, the limitation on providing supervision is 10.
Mhm.
Do you want to keep that consistent with 10, or do you want to have a different amount?
I like 10 or 7.
I think 10.
Yeah, I think 10 is fine.
The same.
Looks like there's support for 10.
Oh, that was easy.
Great. And then probably, I assume, recommendation to, add some language into the documentation of continuing education so that it's clear what would qualify for that documentation for people attending those hours. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other item, Leslie, that you mentioned, not the receipt.
They're in consultation.
Mhm.
Are you interested in having that? And if so, part of receiving supervision, like Melissa said, or separate?
I lean towards separate.
They are two different things.
I do agree they're two different things. I guess my worry was if we say, okay, you can have 10 hours of supervision, you can have 10 hours of consultation, do we start then limiting other experiences that we are wanting licensees to have?
I think
So I
there's
was
still
more thinking of it as
flexibility
the
there.
limit.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So just to put this also out there, your ethics and diagnosis and treatment cannot be used. You can't use case consultation for that. It has to be a course or something like that. Just there's those 9 hours, but that's going to change to 6. So you may want to, you could also do it for less hours. Doesn't have to be 10 like the rest. It could be 7 or 8 or anything. What I am going to try to do is make them the same for all professions, the amounts for the same. If you have to have 30 hours of CEUs, that the amounts are the same in all professions so that it's not confusing if you have more than one license.
Good point. So what are some of the other disciplines doing? Do you have feedback on that?
I do social work, hold on. But they're lowering their hours to 30. They're going to be in line with you. So I put it in, hold on a sec, let me find it. I didn't give it a number, so I have 5 to 10 listed. I hadn't finished it because we hadn't discussed the number of hours.
Okay.
So there's no set. Psychology has to have 50 hours of CEUs, so they allow more, obviously.
I don't know, it's, at 10, it just still seems flexible. I mean, we've got the 3 and the 6, and those are obviously going to be required, but I think there's a lot of flexibility with, up to 10. Anyone else?
I do see what Melissa was saying, though. If you put that one in as 10 and not include it somewhere else, then you're limiting some of the other things that they would want we would want them to include, maybe. I don't know.
So by putting up to 10, if we set up to 10, would that suggest some flexibility? Would that solve what Melissa's bringing up?
I think she was saying because if you get 10 hours of you receive 10 hours of supervision and do 10 hours of case consultation, there's already 20 of your hours being taken up.
Gotcha.
So it depends, I guess, on how you feel people learn the best.
I don't know.
I'm with you. I'm going back and forth because I can see the benefit. I mean, I don't know how many people would do both, right? But I think that's the hard part because there may be people, and then that's 20 hours right there out of the 30. And it does, not everybody's gonna, everybody's trying to get to their 30 from a provider standpoint, right? Everybody's just trying to get their 30. And some people go over the 30, and so then that's where they could get the benefit of other trainings, but they're not required to. So that's over half of their credits that they're required to have just with those 2 things. But I can see the benefit too of having that, because that is a learning experience to, do consultation and supervision. I don't know, that's a hard one.
It's also an expensive option. I'm making up that's going to be expensive for somebody. So I like the idea of them having the choice, but if you don't have the money to spend on hourly supervision and consultation, I think a lot of people are going to naturally tilt back to, online CEs and picking things up at conferences. So I don't know that we need to worry too much about people managing their own, their unique ways that they're going to get CEs. I think it's a good idea to mention these 2 options and to frame them.
Could compromise and say 8 hours for each one. That way, just a little bit more than half would be with supervision and or consultation.
We could do all 3. I mean, you could do providing supervision, receiving supervision, unless you think providing supervision to interns and students is more worthy of more hours. I don't know.
I don't know. I'm fine with
Well,
anything we do.
it's like, those are my own hours. I think it'd be fine to move them all, streamline them the same.
And when I think about providing and receiving, I wonder if there are folks that are going to get creative real fast and say, I'm getting a CE for providing and I'm getting a CE for receiving. And that might be interesting.
Mhm. I mean,
I-
it does come to the philosophy on should we let is it best for the regs or them to be written in a way that licensees figure out their best way of learning? And ideally, that's what you would want. I think the worry is most people are checking these boxes off to get them done, not always to be their very best counselor. So you set the structure to try to help people, maybe even force people to try to be their very best counselor. So.
Yeah, and you know, you can get all your hours online now if there's a post test, so it's not really that they're sitting in a class learning.
Right.
But there's no test, there's no way of evaluating, there's no outcome on supervision, or I mean there could be maybe the supervisor, but they don't give that to us, right? Or a consultation, or like unlike trainings where you have objectives and you are measured to determine if you met those objectives. Is there problems with them in those tests? Sure, right? But that's the point of an outcome, is it's supposed to tell you something.
Right. Hearing you talk out loud about that, I like there being a smaller limit, maybe more like 8 of consultation and supervision.
And providing, or
Yeah.
should providing stay at 10? Limit them all to 8? Does that sound fair?
That's my flag. That's what I vote.
Okay.
Anyone else?
I'm good with that.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Anyone not good with that? Okay, so for now, it sounds like we're going with 8. Unless I misunderstand, we're going with 8. Okay. It's so funny what things are easy to decide and what things are a little nuanced. So thank you for the discussion about that and thinking that through. Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Discussion on the questionnaire.
Yeah, and actually, before we go to the item, just real quick, I do want to highlight for all of you, feel free to obtain your continuing education in any of the categories, but I do want to call out item number 11.
Oh, okay.
Says participation in professional organizations or appointment to professional credentialing boards if the goal of the organization or boards are clearly related to the enhancement of professional counseling practice, values, ethics, skills, or knowledge. Participation may include holding office or serving on committees of the organization or board. The maximum number of allowable continuing education hours shall be 10. So your work on the advisory committee will allow you to count those hours if you would like to do so at some of your continuing education hours. So I always like to call that out for the advisory committees, because I have heard that sometimes members have served for a number of years, and you know, like I said, you can count your hours in other categories and not count those ones, but you're certainly entitled to them if you would like that, and you can always ask me for a letter to document those hours.
That's great, David. Thank you. That's terrific.
So moving to the questionnaire. So you had a really good discussion at your last meeting. We had looked at some possible draft questions, and there were some other ideas individuals had. For those of you that are new to the advisory committee, the social work advisory committee in the past has worked on some questions, and we have done a couple, actually 3 now, questionnaires for licensees, all the licensed social workers, and based on the feedback they provided to those questionnaires, we put together reports, and a couple of those are published on the BSRB website under resources. And so we thought it would be a really positive idea to offer to the other professions the ability to survey their licensees as well. And so each of the advisory committees is kind of having a similar conversation and discussing what types of questions would be relevant to the work of the advisory committee. And so last time we talked about a few of them that had to do with any issues they see in terms of receiving or providing supervision. Also, some of the questions concerning, we're unique in Kansas in that we have 2 permanent levels of license for professional counseling. Some only have a permanent level at the clinical level. And so some questions about if individuals have held a LPC license, but have not moved to an LCPC, some of the reasons for that. And so also some questions about the multi-state compact and if individuals are interested in seeking a privilege in other states, or maybe how many licenses they currently have in other states. That would be helpful for us to kind of get an idea of perhaps how many privileges people might be wanting to seek under the compact. Any issues regarding the practice of telehealth and some of the changes there. A broad question that involves feedback and of course some questions about demographics to make sure that we have a broad range of practitioners. There was also a question about how many years have individuals practiced, so we could kind of see that too, make sure we have a good sampling. There were some questions individuals talked about as far as reimbursement and type of pay that is being received in terms of Medicaid, Medicare, private pay, self-pay, maybe different types of clients that individuals are providing services to, or even how many hours of services individuals are providing. We've been having a conversation. I'm currently volunteering to help out with a National Academy for State Health Policy. It's a NASHB work group, and there's individuals from the Department for Aging and Disability Services, KDAD, also the Board of Regents. Also, we've had some assistance from some of the CMHCs in terms of the work of that group, but it's really kind of focusing on trying to think creatively about workforce and helping people get into pipelines for the mental health professions. So looking at some of those topics, we were having a broader conversation of, well, we have license count, but do we know how many of the people that are licensed are actually providing services, or what type of work are they doing? So this will help us understand our licensees better to be able to have more of an informed conversation regarding workforce. So, but I did want to include it on the agenda for this meeting to see if any of you had any additional thoughts on questions that we could potentially add to the survey. If you do, we can kind of add those, and then I can figure out exactly how the questions will look when they go out. My plan or my goal is that probably sometime either in late August or very early September, we would launch the survey and then give people about maybe 10 days or so to provide responses back. And we would send that out through SurveyMonkey. And then when that information is collected, we can put together a report, and then we can review that at the next advisory committee meeting. But if we have it out early enough, we could also have the board have that information. So it'd be helpful for the board's all-day planning meeting too. So any other thoughts on possible questions that you think would be helpful to include in the survey that we haven't already talked about? If not, then I guess we'll move forward with that. You will be getting we will send this out to all licensees. There will be a separate link for those that have a clinical level license versus a non-clinical license. That way we can track those responses from the 2 groups. I think that could be helpful in certain ways. But when we do send that out, you'll be getting an email from the BSRB. And then for individuals who don't respond to the survey with the first email, we'll be trying to do targeted follow-ups to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to provide responses back.
David, thank you for that. I'm really looking forward to hearing the responses from the survey. It was really, the social work folks presented their survey, and it was just such a great amount of feedback. Yeah, this is going to be great. Thank you for doing that.
Sure.
Okay, next, educational requirements.
Yeah, so we have, your advisory committee did a lot of work looking at the regulation for educational requirements 102-3-3A. And so we talked about we're a creature of statute, and the statute establishes the main requirements for licensure as a professional counselor. or clinical professional counselor. Within some of that language, it allows the board to determine more detail concerning the requirements for licensure. And so this regulation, KAR 102-3-3A, talks about the specific requirements when individuals are applying. And it includes language here that basically says if individuals receive their education from a school that's accredited by the National Accrediting Body, KCREP, we're able to move those individuals through the pathway. But we also provide greater flexibility in Kansas. So if someone went to a non-accredited school, we are still able to evaluate them to see if they meet the requirements for licensure, but there's a different pathway for that. And there's some language here that has some program level requirements and additionally some coursework level requirements. And like I said, your advisory committee has reviewed this regulation. There were some recommended changes to deal with the issue of in-residence, which previously required individuals from non-accredited schools to have to get some of their coursework physically at the school. Now that has been opened up and that regulation has gone into effect. And so you can meet that requirement either physically at the school or remotely face-to-face by synchronous video conferencing. And again, that's just for the applicants from non-accredited schools that are trying to meet the alternate pathway licensure. There's also been a change that is implemented now. So individuals who obtain their education from non-accredited schools, it previously said the person chairing or directing the program had to have a degree in counseling specifically. Now it says they would have to have that degree in counseling or a related field. So that has helped us have additional people that would meet the qualifications for licensure. But in a bigger picture sense, we wanted you to revisit this regulation because while the changes that your advisory committee recommended and similarly social work, addiction counseling, and marriage and family therapy had similar changes to modernize and update the regulation, we wanted to let you take this regulation and compare it to some of the license requirements in other states. And Leslie Allen did a fair amount of research polling the license requirements in our surrounding states. So in your packet of material, you not only have KAR 102-3-3A, you also have the requirements for Missouri, Oklahoma, Colorado, and Nebraska. And so we're a little short on time at this meeting, but thought this might be helpful to frame this conversation that we can revisit in the future. I think, like I said before, every state has the ability to set up requirements for licensure within their state. And every state, I think, had individuals who did the best they could determining what were really quality requirements for licensure. Right now, we're revisiting these requirements to say, are these current? Should these be the requirements for licensure? So if someone applies for licensure and they don't meet these standards, is that a good reason to deny that person professional counseling license in the state of Kansas? And so we thought it would be helpful for you to see what other states are looking for and what they require compared to what Kansas requires to see in a bigger picture, should we make larger changes to what we have as our standards compared to what other states may require for their standards. So we can probably discuss that at a future meeting, but I thought that might be helpful. And Leslie, is there anything you wanted to say about that? Because you were the one who looked into this and pulled the research, and I really appreciate that. Anything you want to the advisory committee about that?
I was just going to state that if you look at the other states, the program requirements are significantly less. And when they say they want an evaluation, it's usually by CCE, which is who we use. And I noticed when right before the meeting, I was highlighting the program requirements for all the different states so that I could talk about it. But Colorado actually has the most. However, with individuals I've talked to at CCE reviewing Colorado's education, they accept coursework from anything. It can be art therapy, it can be school counseling. It doesn't have to be, they accept very, they're very open with what they will accept for the coursework, where ours is a little better defined.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to point that out. So
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for all the work you did. I was scrolling through this when it was sent, and it's really good information for us to have. So
It's very
So,
interesting.
yeah, right. So we'll move this discussion to our next meeting. Is that what feels right to do?
I think just to give it enough time for people to review that information
Yeah.
And have a good, healthy discussion, that'd be good.
Sure, especially with new folks also.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, good. So we'll move that to that'll be new old business next week or next month, 2 months from now. Thank you for that. Okay, possible recommendations for board agenda for the legislature. Okay. Should we go there?
Sure, I think that'd be good.
Okay.
So I mentioned at the end of September, the very last day of September, the board is going to hold its annual offsite planning meeting. And that is a really good time for the board members to discuss items that they may be relevant to a legislative agenda, where board members could say, we want to make big changes and we want to request legislation in terms of statutory changes. And so the work of the advisory committees is to consider recommendations of things deferred from the board to the advisory committee, but the advisory committees could similarly make recommendations back to the board. So with the understanding that the board has a meeting coming up, probably before the next time your advisory committee will meet, we did want to allow a little bit of time in case any advisory committee members had any comments or had any specific recommendations they might want to have the professional counsel and advisory committee refer to the board in terms of a possible requested change to the statute.
David, you think that would be possible? This has been a discussion nationwide about salary compensation for counselors. Seems like counselors make less money than anybody else. And apparently that discussion have come out a couple of times on a national level. And I don't know where we are in terms of Carol mentioned that or put that on the radar for a later discussion, because I think it will come down now that we got approved to be compensated through Medicare. And when you look in terms of the salaries, it's a little bit of this compression when you look at salary of a psychology PhD versus a counselor educator counselor. And I think that eventually will touch us in some degree. It's not resolved, but I just wonder if that would be something to mention, because that goes along with the whole idea of artificial intelligence. It's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And I think as many more of us decide that we want to have a PhD to be a counselor educator, there's no longer a master level, then we also compensation also should be something nice to discuss. Just saying.
Okay.
Adil, would you forward some articles to us and some of that elicit some of that discussion? I'd like to learn more about that, and I'm sure our advisory committee members would as well.
Yeah, I will find it. It's in CESNET that started, actually used to be a boss of mine in Virginia. She started the discussion in terms of the disparity. Let's say nurse practitioners can actually charge more than we do to do counseling, but counselors charge less. But I will find it and forward to you, Laura, and the group, okay?
Yeah, please do. Thank you so much.
And for those of you that are new to the committee, certainly a relevant topic for the counseling profession. We are somewhat of a small agency in terms of the larger players at the state level when it comes to how much money we oversee as an agency. So usually the reimbursements for licensees probably are more affected by the Department for Aging and Disability Services, KDAS, or the Department of Health and Environment. But as we're having conversations about workforce, it's good that we're informed about those topics as well. And as it relates to licensees and trying to, help out and understand the profession and some of the obstacles, I think that's definitely a good topic for us to all be more aware of. So, Adila, I appreciate you bringing that up.
Absolutely. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, well, thank you, Adil, for bringing that conversation into the forefront, and we'll look at what you send us, and I'm sure it's going to be coming up, so I'm glad you brought it up. Okay, discussion on adding the description for the BSRB website.
Yes, and just kind of to frame this conversation, we started this discussion a little bit last meeting, but where this originated, there were individuals who have asked us in the past. Maybe some of the public members of the board have said, we oversee 7 professions, but it would be helpful for members of the public probably to have a better understanding of what each of these professions is and what a behavior analyst is, or what professional counseling is. And so we have been wanting to add some language to the BSRB website. We have some existing frequently asked questions, but they're more targeted towards licensees, and they deal with the requirements to become a practitioner. But we want to add some information there for the public, so that if individuals from the public want to have a better understanding of the different professions, we can provide some very basic language that can be helpful for them. So the board decided to refer that topic to the advisory committees to start that conversation, and then have a discussion about language, and then refer that back to the board. So I did include a few different, couple different documents for you in your packet. One, in terms of defining professional counseling, I thought it would be helpful to just take the statute KSA 65-5802 and just to highlight a few different terms in that statute. One is E, that's the definition of licensed clinical professional counselor, F, which is the definition of licensed professional counselor, and then also H, professional counseling, as it's defined in the statute. Thought I would just kind of give you the official definitions that are in law, and that way we can, the language we put on the website doesn't have to be the specific language, but I thought that might be a nice starting point for some of that discussion. And then there's another document that I went ahead, I took a couple of comments that were sent to me in email form after our last meeting, and Adil had sent a comment about counseling is a professional relationship that empowers diverse individuals, families, and groups to accomplish mental health, wellness, education, and career goals. And Michael Countryman had also provided some language about a licensed clinical professional counselor. LCPC is a professional who's been qualified to provide psychotherapy and other counseling services. LCPCs are trained to work with individuals, families, and groups to treat mental, behavioral, and emotional problems and disorders. Becoming an LCPC establishes an individual as an expert in the fields of mental health and psychotherapy in the United States. So I wanted to forward you both of those, that language that those individuals had provided. We can kind of carry this forward to the next meeting as well, given the time constraints. But I just kind of wanted to show you where we're at, and then for the new members, kind of to frame why we're looking at that topic. It's really just to help members of the public who aren't familiar with being educated as a professional counselor, or having gone through and become licensed, but helping them understand those fields a little bit better.
Thank you for that. And I'm glad we're going to move that down to our next meeting, because it obviously is an important topic. We want to dedicate time to, as is C, discussion of artificial intelligence regulation. Whew. I always get a little lightheaded when I think about that one.
Yeah.
On that topic, it would also be important to know kind of how the other professions are defining themselves within that. If you're wanting the public to be able to recognize the differences, we need to be able to, take a look and position our responses kind of as a response, rather than just a definition that may not define it very well for the public.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't want it to stand alone. Right.
Yeah, the task in ACA have continued, so I think that we'll have more resources from ACA coming up at a later date. I want to say also that I sent everybody the discussion that was in CESNET about salary, compensation. Okay, so I mean, it's a discussion, and it's biased, of course, because it's led by cancer educators.
Sure.
But we give you a taste of something that is there. And I know ACA right now is trying to put a task for policy to trying to look at salary compensation.
Great. Thank you.
And just to kind of comment on what I mentioned earlier as the new members, it's okay for members of the committee to forward information. You just want to make sure you don't have the back and forth. So when it starts to be more of a discussion, then it really needs to happen in an open meeting. So yeah. If you ever have any questions, or if you, it's okay to talk to one member of the committee, where you start to run into issues if you involve the majority of the members of the committee. So if you ever have a question, if you can reach out to me, you definitely can. If you ever have a question, if you can reach out to the chair, Laura Shaughnessy, definitely anything like that. But when it starts to involve back and forth outside of a meeting, that's where you run into issues. But Adil, thank you for forwarding that, and appreciate us continuing to look at that. In terms of that artificial intelligence topic, I did include a link that Adil had provided in terms of the recommendations of the ACA on artificial intelligence. And then also there is a document from the National Board for Certified Counselors on ethical principles for artificial intelligence and counseling from April 12th, 2024. So feel free to look at those items for the next meeting. And if you happen to be aware of anyone who has put out good information on artificial intelligence or how possibly we can look to start regulating that, please feel free to forward that my direction, and I can distribute to the members of the committee if that would be helpful for you. So.
I attended TEDx KC on Friday, which is a great conference if anyone ever gets to go to that. And there was a really good talk on artificial intelligence from a NASA conscience and consciousness rather presenter. So I'm going to send that out. It's, you know, it's colloquial. There's not a lot of clinical information that's directly related to counselors, but it was an interesting take on how to think about AI in relation to what we're talking about. So I'm going to just send that out as something interesting you might like. When I get it, as soon as it's published, I'll send it out. So we'll further discuss artificial intelligence at our next meeting. Our next meeting will be October 7th, 10 a.m. Anybody have any questions before we adjourn? Okay, I need a motion for adjournment, please.
I motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. I need a second.
Second.
Thank you, Michael. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right. I doubt I'm going to hear any opposition, but I'll ask for it. Thank you so much for your time and your contributions. And again, welcome to our new people, and we will see you in 2 months.
Thank you.
Thank you.
everyone.
Have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
Bye.